to my channel. I'm Sarah, and in my last video I talked about tips to move out of your parents' house. Well, the whole video itself was about my opinion on not rushing into college right out of high school. If you haven't seen that yet, I recommend you go look at it in this little card over here or wherever on the screen I put stuff. But I mentioned that some people I know, including myself, rushed into college because they were desperate to get out of their parents' house, and I wanted to shine a light on something that I wish I knew when I was younger, which was you can just move out. If your main reason for wanting to go right into college is to move out, it would be a lot cheaper for you just to move out and kind of sort out your life first before you make a plan for higher education. So that is what I'm going to go into today. Tips to move out of your parents' house or move out of your current living situation and live on your own. So we're going to go over taxes, budgeting, income, all the logistical stuff, and then I'm going to give you guys some general living tips. If there's anything that comes up and you're kind of curious about it, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. But with that, we'll get into it. So the first thing that you're going to need to secure to be financially independent is income, right? But in order to do that, you actually have to take a step back and figure out how much exactly you need to make. So we'll call this the break-even point, how much you need to make just to afford your basic living expenses and not necessarily have anything left over. So under budget, a few general tips I would give you first before we go into the numbers is to look for some safe and reliable roommates to split rent with. I know that a lot of people would prefer living alone, and that's definitely an option if you can afford it, but especially when you are young and starting out, it helps out a lot to have even just one other roommate, not just to split expenses with, but to just kind of navigate living on your own together. Even if you end up having bad roommates, it is an interesting learning experience, and it does help you know what to look for in a roommate later on. Also, if you're renting an apartment, make sure to look for apartments that specifically rent out by the entire apartment and not by room. The student housing by where I went to college had per room living situations, and it was really weird when I think about it in hindsight, but I think it's something that's common that is around universities or apartments that are catered just for student housing. An apartment that rents just by the entire apartment though will be a lot cheaper overall than one that rents by room. If you are going to look into renting a house or a room inside of a house, make sure that you're really thorough on what all that includes, what you'll get to use in the house in addition to your bedroom, and how much time you have using it dedicated to yourself. Also, if the house has a yard, if it has certain amenities, just be very thorough whether you rent an apartment or a house or something else. Also, keep in mind that some of you guys might have expenses outside of basic living expenses, so that considers things like Spotify subscription or some other subscription or some bill that you have, or if you have a pet that you plan to take care of. So we're going to account that into the budgeting that we are going to do today. I went ahead and made a budget template in Google Sheets, which I'm going to link down below for you to save for yourself and modify. I definitely recommend you make a copy for yourself and modify it from there. But we're going to talk about a really basic budget template that I would have used when I was younger, where you have just basic living expenses, and then you can add on whatever else you need. But just at the bare minimum, say if you're really desperate just to get out of the house, we'll start with the bare bones budget. So here's a budget for a situation if you say have only one other roommate, whether that is a close friend or a family member or a significant other. Some people only have one other roommate, like myself right now, so we will consider an apartment. And I'm also going to base these prices off of my local area, but it might change for you. So let's say that an average one bedroom apartment, it might be about $900 total or $1,000 total. So half of that would be my split of the rent is about $450, right? For my personal area, a 2-bedroom would be just slightly higher than that, say maybe $1,200 to $1,500. But for this situation, just to talk about how to use these numbers, we'll say that my split of the rent is $450. On top of that, most apartments say that they include water, but they might also just charge water back to you. And you can assume that you would also take half of that. So under one other person, I would be splitting all this in half. So say that water, my split would be about $10. My split of electricity would be about $30, internet about $25, all my split of it. Food for myself, most people who have roommates will just account for their own groceries. Let's say about $200 budget for every month I have to use on food. And then I'm going to use this miscellaneous category for things like Spotify subscriptions, for cat food, for little things that you didn't really think about, say if a bowl breaks and you have to buy a new one. So let's put a miscellaneous budget or like a little cushion of about $100. So in total, let's say with one other roommate, your basic living expenses or your break-even point, how much you need to make to be able to live, would be about $815 in this situation. So now that we have a theoretical goal or parameters to stay within, we can start doing some numbers crunching to figure out what kind of income or what kind of job you might need to look for. So let's say that you got a part-time job as a barista. And again, these numbers are going to be different based on where you live, but let's just test something out. Let's say that you get a part-time job as a barista and you make $9.50 an hour. Okay. You plan to work part-time because you're going to use the rest of the time to either take classes or have some other kind of activity, or if you have some other kind of obligation. So let's say that you can only work at this barista job 20 hours a week. So just doing some basic math, let's say $9.50 at 20 hours a week would equal $190 a week. Take that $190 a week and multiply it by 4 weeks in a month, and that would be your monthly income of about $760. You won't be able to predict the precise amount of tax that your country will take out for you, but there are a lot of online tools that you can use to kind of calculate tax ahead of time to help with your budget. So I just used the one for Texas, and all round that we would take home about 86% of this theoretical situation pay. So working a part-time job at $9.50 an hour after tax would mean that you would take home about $653.60 a month, which is clearly not enough to meet our theoretical budget. Now you might understand why minimum wage needs to be raised. So now we did that theoretical situation. Now we know that we do need to make more than $9.50 an hour in order to make our break-even point, right? So let's raise the pay a little bit and figure out some more numbers. So let's say that you found a different job, maybe another barista job or just another kind of part-time job that pays $13 an hour. So with $13 an hour, doing all the math, you would make roughly $1,040 a month, and then after taxes, you would take home $894.40. So that would give you an idea that around $13 an hour is where you would want to look for in terms of income in this situation. Obviously, you can decide for yourself what amount of leftover in that budget you're most comfortable with. In this situation, it is just slightly over your break-even point. So in this budget, you'd be able to take home a little bit extra every month. It will give you a little bit of leeway on your living expenses. But most people like to go a little bit even higher than that so that they have a lot left over for saving, for maybe going to stocks, or for paying off school. But there's a lot of reasons why you would want to go for a little higher so that you know how much you have left over after that. So with your basic budgeting, I would recommend you to crunch some numbers and see how much you need to figure out to pay per month to live on your own in your area. And then after that, figure out what level of pay you would need to achieve in order to make that point every month. It is really basic math. And instead of just doing everything by paper, you could just use a Google Sheets or a Excel template and just crunch the numbers in there. I did that starting out where I just set up a template with all this basic math, and then I could just input numbers and test things out so that I know exactly how much I need to make per month. If there's a job that I'm weighing, how much it would benefit me compared to something else. But I would say that that is basically how you do a basic budget. Now that you figured out kind of your parameters in your budget, you can actually go into income and figuring out how you're going to make that budget work. There's a lot of ways you can secure some income, but as with everything, I suggest you set some rules or some parameters for yourself first just to make it a little easier. Something that I wish that I did when I was younger as well was to try to think more about jobs that would fit me the best, because at least for me, every time I just took a job that I could find but didn't really fit me that well, I didn't really stay very long. And that's not always a bad thing. It's not always a big deal if you job hop part-time jobs a lot, but it would be more comfortable for you if you could stay in a stable situation for longer. So I recommend you try to think about what will work best for your personality and for your skills. So to give you an example here, first, I'd tell you to consider if you're more fit for a knowledge-based job or a labor-based job. And the main difference here is in a knowledge-based job, it's mainly going to require your mental energy and your mental skills, and a labor-based job is mainly going to require your physical energy and your physical skills. When I was a teenager and when I was in college and a little after college, all the part-time jobs I took were very physical-based. So they required me to not just be on my feet, but to be constantly moving, to not necessarily be lifting heavy weights, but to be moving a lot. And I have a few physical qualities that are not necessarily compatible with a physical job. So I have always really, really lacked stamina. I think I'm borderline anemic. I definitely have an iron deficiency, and I have high metabolism. So I tend to eat very often throughout the day in order to stay high energy. But if I'm working a part-time job in which I can't be snacking the entire time, then I'm going to get tired very quickly. It's not like I wasn't able to do these jobs, but I was very low stamina just already halfway through my shifts. I was very tired. And even with working super short shifts, like say maybe 4 hours, I was completely exhausted at the end. I just felt like it wasn't the most efficient use of my personal energy or skills. But in comparison, I had friends that I worked with that were very compatible with these kinds of jobs, and they were able to work way more hours than me and spend their energy a lot more efficiently than I did. In comparison, when I tried out some other kinds of jobs, for example, I used to work in basic IT, I was able to work way more hours, and I was able to be using my mind a lot more longer than if I were using my physical body. So I worked a lot more efficiently in this kind of job, and I actually stayed in my part-time IT job for about 3 years, as opposed to some of my part-time other kinds of jobs that required physical activity. I stayed in those for anywhere from 4 to 6 months instead. So I would encourage you to think about what would fit better for you. If you think that you'd be better at more labor-based jobs or jobs that require more physical skills, some things you can look into are retail jobs, being a waiter, moving boxes for people who are moving out of their homes. It pays a lot of money. You can look for warehouse jobs. I had a friend who worked as a warehouse packer for a long time, and he made a lot of money just off of that. If you're better at knowledge-based jobs, I would recommend you to look into local desk jobs. Look for something as an office manager or receptionist or a virtual assistant. And if you're 18 or older, I would recommend you actually register with a local temp agency or recruiting agency. And basically these businesses will find places to put you based on what you want to look for. So say if you registered yourself at a temp agency, you could tell them that you're open to any kind of desk job within a certain pay range, and they would place you in all kinds of situations based on what works for you. So it could be anywhere from something that's super short term and temporary to something more long term, but these agencies are pretty useful because they can kind of delegate some of that job hunting for you and make it a little easier for you to look for a job. And if you have a long-term goal or some kind of clear career path that you're trying to follow, I'd also recommend you to look for some relevant paid internships first. I know that some people are willing to take unpaid internships, but I highly encourage you to take paid ones because it's a little unethical for companies to have unpaid internships, and I personally think that we should, as a generation, try to discourage that. Think of it this way: if some random kid wanted to come and rake up your leaves or mow your lawn, you wouldn't make them do it for free. So you would at least give them something, and I think the same thing is true of an internship. So I would say that if you have something you're trying to build, then definitely look for some kind of relevant internship first. I could actually talk at length at how to earn money and about finances in general, but if you remember anything, I'd like to encourage you to, the very least, try to start building and reinforcing a more positive mindset around money. As someone who came from a poorer background, I can understand that your feelings about money might be a little taboo or weird, but I definitely can speak from experience that when you start working on transforming that mindset about money, think of it less as a zero-sum game and more that there is plenty of abundance of resources around for everyone, that it actually does make a difference in what you're going to experience. And that definitely took me some time, so we'll take everybody some time. But with that said, let's go into taxes. If you are watching this, you might be still dependent on your parents' taxes. So what this means is your parents can claim responsibility over any income that you make and the taxes that get taken out of that income, even if it's a part-time job. So there's pros and cons to this depending on your situation, and this is something that you can look up. But if you want to claim your own income and claim back the taxes that the government pays back to you from the taxes they take out of your income, then you can claim independent. And I started doing that around college age. So that is exactly what a tax return is. Basically, you report all of your income to the IRS once a year, and they return back to you a certain percentage of all the taxes that you paid over the past year. And there is a crap load of things that are accounted for, from student loan interest to income to your working circumstances. And this is where tax write-offs come in, blah, blah, blah. But that is basically how taxes do work. But you don't actually have to know a lot of these things down to a T. There's a lot of tools today that make filling out taxes a lot easier. This is not sponsored, but just letting you know that I personally used TurboTax for several years, and I still use it just because it's helpful to import last year's data if nothing changed. And basically, you just go in and pick a tool like TurboTax, and you just fill out a bunch of questions that they ask you, and they fill out your tax return for you, and then they electronically file it. And you can track it, and you can see exactly how much you're going to get back, and it just makes filling out taxes actually pretty easy. The reason why a lot of people find taxes to be daunting is when their situations start to get complicated, but especially when you've just moved out and things are pretty simplified for you. You don't have stocks or really crazy things to affect your tax return. It's going to be pretty straightforward. It is not completely free depending on the tool that you use. TurboTax for me cost about $40, but you can ask them to just take it out of your tax return, so I just pretend like that money was never mine. But taxes are pretty simple. I would definitely recommend you to consider claiming independent on your taxes, just because you can get a little bit back with your income every year around tax season, which is the beginning of the year-ish, maybe February to March, depending on when you file. And that little boost can definitely help you out financially every year. So finally, let's go over some general independent living tips. So you can never know too much. Knowledge is truly power. I encourage you to look up as much as possible about where you're going to live, the area you're going to live, and everything that you can about the situation that you'll be in. I'm not saying that you're supposed to live in fear and obsessively look over everything in a really scared way, but it is really helpful to know all of your local stores, the local places. If you have neighbors, you don't have to get super friendly with your neighbors if you're uncomfortable with that, but it's good to at least recognize the faces of who usually lives in your building, especially if some random person is walking around one day. So the more you know, the better. And I would always encourage you to be as safe as possible. Speaking of safety, I know that you probably already know this, but make sure you take proper measures to be educated about safety. Don't walk home alone. Don't advertise if you live alone. Don't advertise if you don't live alone and your roommate is going to be on a trip for a few days. Just be very careful about how much information you share about your living situation. Apartment doors, at least in my area, usually come with 2 locks. One is a padlock. If everybody is in for the night, it never hurts just to flip that padlock on, Make sure your emergency contacts know where you live. Any close family members, any close friends, you should definitely let certain people know where you live. And on that note, Make sure that some of these people know your general schedule in case something goes awry or you go missing for some reason. Make sure that at least somebody knows what your usual living situation is. Safety aside, here's some other random tips. Never buy groceries when you're hungry. If you're trying to stay within your budget, make sure you are always full before you go and buy things at the grocery store. And definitely make a plan. You don't have to literally plan every single meal or fully meal plan, because I know that not everybody has the time for that, but it does generally help even if you just think about the things that you usually eat and what you need more of. You will usually think about things like getting some of this will help me have like sandwiches for lunch for the next week, and getting some of this will help me have spaghetti for a few dinners and things like that. Ramen's always good to have when you're on a budget. If you live in Texas, another tip that I have is H-E-B, which is one of the biggest grocery chains here, allows you to do delivery, and it does cost extra, but COVID safety aside, which is definitely a benefit. Something that is also great about delivery is picking out your groceries ahead of time online will not only help you align with your plan, but it also saves you time, and it also makes sure that you stay within your budget. Because I don't know about you, but when I go to the grocery store and I see a little snack, I want to take that snack, and I usually do. So buying your groceries by delivery helps. It also helps not to congest traffic. It's just, for me, it's only $10 extra, and I'm okay with that. Next tip is to clean a little bit every day rather than a ton all at once. And you can actually start establishing some systems that you work within to make this even easier. So for example, have a laundry hamper or something like that set up to just toss your dirty clothes in so they're not all over the floor. Wash your dishes every time you use them. It seems a little tedious, but it saves you a lot more time in the long run than if you had to stop and dedicate some time every single week to just do a full clean. I know some people prefer that, but I personally like to just clean a little bit every day instead. It also makes a huge difference mentally. Your space makes a big difference on how your mindset is, how stressed you feel. So I would definitely encourage you to keep your space clean and free of clutter, especially if you're an anxiety-ridden mess like me. It helps a lot. Make sure to stock up on basic medicine, because if you get sick, especially if you live alone or if you have a roommate you're not comfortable asking to go buy things for you, you're not going to want to go buy stuff for your sickness when you're sick. Just stay at home. So some of the things I recommend you always have on hand is Pedialyte if you get dehydrated for a number of reasons, Pepto-Bismol and Tums, or any kind of stomach medicine. And I say both of those things because Pepto-Bismol and Tums are made of different things and they do different things. One is for diarrhea and general stomach problems, and the other one is for heartburn. So make sure that you look for those two different kinds of medicines. Some kind of fever reducer, cold medicine, just choose what works the best for you. I know not the same chemicals work the best for everyone. Always some kind of first aid kit, and maybe some additional bandages if you have a cat, and some cans of soup. Just something that is non-perishable that you can have on hand that is very nourishing in case you don't have the energy to cook. And my last general tip is don't buy too much furniture if you plan to move fairly often. And fairly often in apartment living terms is about once a year. I definitely have made the mistake in the past where I kind of just went crazy at some point and just bought a lot of things, including appliances. And they were good purchases in the short run, but then I wasn't able to afford to move all of them because I could only afford to move things by myself in my car. And I ended up having to throw away a lot, and I still hurt from that to this day. So I would encourage you to think mindfully about what you're purchasing and the commitment you're making to carry and store and use this physical object. So that was kind of my general overview of my moving tips and how to move out of your current living situation. If you have anything else to add, I say feel free to leave them down below. Are there any of you who have additional tips to others on how to move out of your parents' house, especially when you're young? I would love to hear them. But with that was the video. If you would like more content on lifestyle, on whatever comes into my brain in the middle of the night, please go ahead and subscribe. I would appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye. That's all I want, 'cause all I want is you.